What are the defining features for tech house? What makes tech house tech house? And while most people loosely understand it's somewhere between techno and house music, more specific than that, most people will have a hard time pointing at a feature and going, that makes something tech house, whereas that makes something techno, or that makes something house music. And what I've done is, in my opinion at least, made up quite a concise definition for tech house, which also loosely defines techno and house music at the same time. So what is this definition that I've come up with? First of all, a BPM between say 122 and 125, typically 123 tends to be about average. The drums are typically quite groovy, quite dancey, quite complicated, quite complex, and typically, at least, again, you can do whatever you like, but typically they do tend to be more housey than techno. And then here is the bit that I think is quite a clever definition for tech house. Tech house has more melody than techno, but less emotion than house. It's more repetitive than house music, but less repetitive than techno. And finally, the sounds used are normally more electronic or synthetic than house music, but less harsh and less abrasive than techno. I think that's a really good definition for tech house, better than anything else I've seen on the internet, and I know it's my own definition, so I might be a little bit biased, but I think that's a really good definition for tech house because it also defines loosely house and techno at the same time. One more time, tech house has more melody than techno, less emotion than house, it's more repetitive than house, less repetitive than techno, and it's typically at least more electronic than house and less harsh or abrasive than techno. Let me give you 3 examples covering the entire range of the tech house spectrum from the housey end through to the more techno end. First of all, a more housey example. Check it out. Nice and dancey, nice and housey, but it's got some of that repetition from techno. The bass line repeats over a bar, and the drums effectively repeat over half a bar. If you then started to add in, say, a long chord progression or a proper melody with some real-life instruments, then it might get a bit too emotional or a bit too melodic for tech house, and it might end up being a full-on house track. But because it's in this middle ground, it's tech house. And here is another example. I'll play it through. This one is right in the middle of the tech house spectrum. So I'll play it through and then point out what features make it somewhat like techno and somewhat like house. Great stuff. So why isn't this house music? There's not enough emotion. And why isn't it techno? Well, yes, it's quite repetitive. Overall, it's not super repetitive. If you take a look at the bass line, yes, it appears to repeat every eighth of a beat, but then you've also got those little fill notes, so it's really repeating over a bar and not just eighths. And then the drums and percussion. The percussion just isn't quite repetitive enough to be techno. Not to mention it's got that housey, shuffly vibe to it, which you can sometimes see in techno, but it's not that common. And finally, an example on the techno end of the tech house spectrum. Listen to this through. To be honest, the only reason this isn't necessarily techno, you could always call it techno if you really wanted to, but the only reason why I would personally call this tech house and not techno is the percussion. Notice how the percussion isn't that repetitive. I mean, yes, it's repetitive, but it's not super repetitive, if that makes any sense. So I'll play it through. Hopefully you can see what I mean. See what I mean? It's repetitive, so definitely on the techno end of the spectrum, but it's not super repetitive, and there's a nice amount of groovy, shuffly stuff happening with the percussion. Therefore, in my opinion at least, this would fall into the tech house genre. And there you go, that is tech house. They are the defining features. Thanks for watching.